Hello again, writers. Welcome back to my study. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the use of who and whom. Not a terribly difficult, sticky situation for most of us. Most of us understand that when we use who, we're using it in the sense of a subject of a sentence, for example. And when we use whom, we're using it as an object of a preposition or a direct object of a verb along those lines. So it's not very difficult to figure that out when we have simple sentences, but it does get a little bit complicated when we talk about more complicated or complex sentences. So we're going to use this little worksheet that I've adapted from Diana Hacker and Nancy Summers' Rules for Writers to kind of unravel some of the more difficult to understand or difficult to unravel problems that we have in the use of who and whom sometimes. And the first thing we're going to kind of consider is its use in subordinate clauses. So what's a subordinate clause? Well, a subordinate clause is a part of a sentence, a group of words that functions in the sentence as something, as a unit. For example, it might have a subject, it might have a verb, it might even have an object. But it does not stand alone as a sentence because in the sentence that we're looking at or applying it to, a subordinate clause functions as a modifier, an adjective, an adverb, a noun, something like that. So the group of words is taken together to form that function in a subordinate clause. And when that happens, we sometimes get confusion as to what role various pieces of that clause are playing in that particular sentence. Okay, so let's take some examples. First of all, let's look at the rule. It's very straightforward in blue. It says, in subordinate clauses, use who and whoever for subjects and subject complements, whom and whomever for all objects. Very straightforward. The rule we know, we should know it well, and it's pretty much the same. It's in the application where we run into some problems sometimes. So let's look at our first sentence here. We have a sentence that says, first prize goes to the runner whom earns the most points. We have to the runner whom, and that gets a little confusing because we might be talking about to and an object of the preposition here, and so we're a little unsure what's going on here. But if we take it and look at it in the terms of what is the subordinate clause and then look at the clause itself, we can unravel this. So the subordinate clause is whom earns the most points. So in the clause, whom is functioning as the subject of the sentence. Whom earns. Who earns. It has to be who because it is the subject. So we need to fix that and change that from whom to who. So we look at the clause and isolate what the function of the words in the clause is, and then we can unravel which application of who or whom to use. Let's look at another example here. Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings should be read by whomever is interested in the effects of racial prejudice on children. So again, we have the form whomever coming right after the word by. So we're tempted to think that we're talking about whomever as the object of the preposition again, and that would be correct. It would be the correct form if it were, but it's not because the subordinate clause is whomever is interested in the effects of racial prejudice on children, modifying the rest of the sentence here and connected to that independent clause. So within the subordinate clause, whomever is interested in, etc., whomever is functioning as, again, the subject of the verb here. Whomever is. So whomever is incorrect because it's a subject. It has to be whoever. You follow what's going on here? Okay. Here's another example. You will work with our senior traders who you will meet later. Okay, so the clause is who you will meet later, and you will work with our senior traders. So what is the functioning of who in that clause? Who is actually the object in this case. You will meet whom. You will meet whom is the object. So we need to change that from the subjective, the subject, to the object, and we do that by using whom instead of who. Here's another example. The tutor who I was assigned to was very supportive. Okay, we've got a situation here where we're separating the use of who from its object. From its preposition, as an object from the preposition to. So really we could test that by saying the tutor to whom I was assigned, and again we see that we have who as the object of the preposition, so it has to be whom. The tutor whom I was assigned to was very supportive. So you see what's happening here. We're just finding out where the links are, what the function of the word who, the form of who, is in the sentence we're looking at, or the clause we're looking at. Here's another example of a confusing sentence that makes us kind of wonder and pause. The speech pathologist reported a particularly difficult season with a stroke patient whom she knew was suffering from aphasia. Okay, so here we have, again, a subordinate clause, whom she knew was suffering from aphasia. And in this case, we're talking about the wrong form again. Whom is an object here as we've rendered it, but it should be a subject. Who was suffering from aphasia? Who, the subject of the verb, was suffering. Okay, so you can see the confusion that arises, and if we just kind of stop and think about it, we can unravel it and figure it out. Now in questions, use who and whoever for subjects, whom and whomever for all objects. Again, the rule is the same. It's in the application where we get confused. So here's an example of an inappropriately rendered use of the word who. Whom was responsible for creating that computer virus? A question here. So again, we have the objective form when we should have the subjective form, or the subject of the sentence. Who was responsible? Very difficult to sometimes see, but it's very easy when we think about it as the subject of the sentence. Who did the Democratic Party nominate in 2008? We can easily solve that by just rephrasing that whole group of words and saying the Democratic Party nominated in 2008 whom? Nominated whom in 2008? The Democratic Party nominated whom in 2008 shows us that it is, again, the object. So again, use the object. We change that to whom. Use whom for subjects or objects of infinitives. Infinitives, the to form. And when we have that, it has to be one or the other. Use whom for subjects, objects of infinitives. When it comes to money, I know whom to believe. Okay, just the object of the infinitive to believe. Okay, and subjects are the same kind of thing when we're working with an infinitive. Just a rule that you have to remember. Okay, there are some examples of kind of times when it can be confusing to figure out which one we use, who or whom, and some general rules which are very simple, and some examples that show us how to unravel and figure out which form we should use in any given circumstance.